But exile is never simple. It ripples through the skin, settling deep between the bones, turning every moment into a quiet rehearsal for wars not yet declared. For Napoleon, these first years away from home are spent in a world of uniforms and rules, where the air is cold and the language colder still. Even the trees here seem disciplined, planted in neat rows, every maple and chestnut standing stiff against the wind as if ordered to attention. The teachers take note of the new boy. He doesn't chatter. His notebooks brim with meticulous diagrams, cannons and cavalry, a child's hand sketching the shape of conquest. The boys at Brienne laugh at his hunger, his accent, the way he walks alone on the fog-shrouded paths. But there is a patience in Napoleon, a secret economy of silence. While others try to belong, he sharpens his difference until it becomes ambition. He learns the names of every battle, the rhythm of marches, the price of waiting when news comes from home, his father's illness worsening, debts piling upon debts. Napoleon clenches his jaw. He learns, young, to swallow grief, to mask it as discipline, to wrap every wound in the armor of will. In these quiet hours, far from the salt and sunlight of Corsica, he nurtures something fierce, a hunger not just for victory, but for vindication, to no longer be forgotten, overlooked, or shamed. His solitude breeds a certain clarity. If he cannot return as a son, perhaps he will return as a conqueror. Over the years, the dark-haired boy matures. He is not tall, but he carries himself with a sureness that unsettles his peers. He learns to speak French without the rough edges, but never loses the island's fire behind his eyes. The world outside is changing, revolutions boiling, old empires trembling. But within Napoleon, the revolution is personal, a staggering effort of transformation, ambition surging against loss and longing. At 16, he leaves for Paris, summoned to the elite military academy. The city is loud, crowded, alive with talk of rights and citizens. Bread is scarce, and storms are gathering overhead. In the cramped rooms, Napoleon writes letters to his mother, promising to rise, to be worthy of respect. He devours history, mathematics, military theory. He studies hard, but even harder he studies people, their doubts, their dreams, their tells. He realizes that power is not just seized on battlefields. It is claimed in salons, in shadows, in the silent calculations behind every handshake. The Bastille falls, the monarchy unravels. Everywhere, the world's old certainties are crumbling. Napoleon watches, listens, waits. He is 24, an artillery officer when he first earns real command. At Toulon, a city besieged by royalists, ringed by British guns. The men are starving, morale is broken, and the generals are indecisive. Napoleon surveys the situation, makes plans, and acts. The victory is brutal, brilliant, a flash of genius amid chaos. For the first time, he tastes the rush of command, the strange stillness at the heart of battle, the way the world listens when you dare to lead. Overnight, his name is whispered in Paris, the little Corsican, the artilleryman, the one with plans. He feels the weight shift, the whisper of possibility. But even now, the shadow of exile clings to him. He's not a son of France, not truly. To many, he'll always be foreign, suspect, dangerous. He learns to use that doubt, to turn suspicion into fear, and fear into obedience. As the revolution devours itself, Napoleon keeps his distance, observing, calculating, surviving. He courts Josephine, the widow with social clout, and when she hesitates, he floods her with letters, full of longing, heat, and hunger for greatness. He feels destiny closing around him, a tide drawing him not just to power, but to legend. The Italian campaign cements his reputation. Against the odds, his ragged, outgunned army wins again and again, using speed, surprise, a gambler's instinct for risk. His march is relentless. With each victory, he grows more certain. History is not made by those who wait, but by those willing to wager everything, names, honor, even happiness, for a future no one else can see. But ambition is lonely. On the battlefield, surrounded by cheering troops, Napoleon feels the chill of solitude. Every night is spent moving pieces on a map, searching for the flaw in his own plan, the crack in his own heart. Love, when it comes, is transactional. Trust becomes rare. He keeps his truest self hidden, compartmentalized, distant, armored against loss. When the French people crown him emperor, the hesitant, exiled child from Corsica is gone. In his place stands a legend, a myth draped in velvet and gold. Yet beneath the regalia, on nights when Paris sleeps and the world is quieter, Napoleon remembers the olive groves, the salt air, the feeling of being too small in a world too vast. He understands, perhaps better than anyone, that the crown is never truly secure. Every triumph is shadowed by the knowledge that what is gained can be lost, that glory breeds enemies, and that kings do not get to rest. In the end, it is not the battles that define him, not the thunder of cannon or the roar of victory, but the silence that follows, the weight of exile, born again after his fall. Once emperor, now a prisoner on a barren island, Napoleon is left with his memories of ambition, of loneliness, of the steep cost of dreams. The world remembers the shouts, the charge, the legend, but in the quiet, in the exile, in the empty hush that follows applause, lies the true story. A man who loved greatness because he feared being forgotten, who sought grounds to mask the ache of exile. Napoleon's journey is not just conquest, but a search for belonging, a reminder that even the most relentless ambition is, at its heart, a longing for home, a voice calling across the water, into the silence, hoping that someone, somewhere, still remembers the boy on the hillside, watching and waiting, with the storm in his eyes.
The night air in Toulon carries the smell of burned powder and salt, mingling above the battered docks and battered men. Shouts ring from scattered camps. Footsteps crunch over spent cartridges and splintered wood. Cannons stand like iron sentinels along the battered ramparts, black as midnight. The great port city, once proud, flickers with caution and fear, its people caught between armies and ideals. Even the gulls seem wary, spiraling in the smoke-stained dawn. Among these restless shadows moves a young man whose name means little, yet. Napoleon Bonaparte, a captain of artillery from Corsica, just 24, his face gaunt with sleeplessness, his uniform patched and muddied, his hands stained with ink and powder. His eyes, however, blaze with a cold intensity. He is not the largest figure on the field, nor the most decorated. His spoken words carry no more weight than the wind, today. But his mind works endlessly, ceaselessly. He walks the perimeters, boots slogging through yellow mud, eyes scanning every rise and roll of land, every abandoned cart or gap in the defenses. He is, at this moment, unproven. Toulon is not yet his crucible, nor France his canvas. But inside him, restless calculations unspool, thoughts of angles, distances, supply lines, the interplay of hills and harbor. While others argue politics in muddy tents, Bonaparte sees only the board, the position of every piece. And in this inferno of loyalty, betrayal, and foreign fleets, he finds one problem worth solving. The Royalists and their British allies possess the city, their banners flapping from the mastheads of warships moored in the bay. Powder and shot, loaded in iron barrels, rest ready to unleash hell at a moment's notice. The stakes are literal. Toulon is the hinge of the revolution's south, a port whose fall could unravel France. The city's fate trembles with every shifting cannon and whispered order, but the defenders have overlooked one scrap of earth. A low rise, dusty and bare, just outside the city's main emplacements. It is not fortified, barely patrolled, and so ordinary it evades notice. Except, as Napoleon observes, from its crest one can see almost all the ships in harbor, their decks busy with marines and ropes and the rising smoke of breakfasts. If guns were placed here for even a few hours, they could sweep the anchorage, deny its safety, challenge supremacy at sea. The fate of Toulon might pivot on this single hillock of stones and dry grass. His superiors dismiss the idea. Their eyes, used to the clamor of rank and precedent, slide past the young captain. But Bonaparte is not deterred. He sketches diagrams on bits of charcoal-scored paper, marking wind direction, ranges, and shot velocity. He speaks, quietly but with unbreakable certainty, to anyone who will listen. At last, exasperated, a superior relents. The order is given to haul heavy guns across the rough ground, pushed by sweating men in homespun coats, horses straining as wheels catch in ruts and mud. A dawn of frozen fingers and anxious silence follows. The British ships still at anchor, white hulls gray in the early light, are unaware of the redoubts now trained upon them from the unfortified hill. Napoleon, hair damp with sea spray, stands beside the first cannon, calculating. The signal passes. One word, one gesture. Fire. The reverberation cracks the cold. The first cannonball shrieks over the harbor, smashing splinters from a distant deck. Another follows, and then another, the battered ships suddenly exposed, their proud artillery now rendered vulnerable. Amid smoke and shouts, Royalist defenders scramble to respond, but it is too late. The harbor, once sheltered, no longer is. Within days, the defenders abandon their positions. The British, caught off guard, withdraw, their sails billowing for distant waters. The city belongs again to the revolution. On its battered streets, hope and fear mingle with the smoke and blood. Napoleon, quiet at the edge of the commotion, is called forth. The victory is undeniable, and at its heart stands his overlooked hill, his artillery, his vision. Word travels rapidly, among generals, among politicians. Brigadier General. The title is bestowed on the man whose cannons turned fate's wheel. He is noticed now, his name whispered at army tables, written in reports. The world tilts, just enough for one persistent mind to edge forward. But for Napoleon there is no celebration. The field remains littered with broken wheel spokes, spent shells, and the relics of men's ambitions, blood-stained jackets, cracked sabers, boots orphaned in the muck. He moves quietly among the aftermath, academic even in exhaustion, crouching by shattered gun carriages, tracing the sweep of metal as if to understand every flaw. Every firepiece could be lighter, every shot smoother, every team more precise. This is his true obsession, not war's glory, but efficiency, the ruthless logic of improvements, each victory a lesson, not a destination. Later, as wind rattles canvas and distant bells mark the hour, Napoleon sits beneath a flickering candle. His desk is a plank set atop discarded crates, his ink thinned with water and sweat. In slanted, hurried lines, he writes. Letters destined for Paris, for his brother at home, sometimes for no clear recipient. Pages of ideas, how to make artillery move more swiftly, how to combine foot soldiers with gunners, how to reimagine the rigid traditions that chain armies to failure. War, for him, is not a contest of brutality, but of intellect, a way to make order from the shapeless, to impose pattern on confusion. The revolution, for all its fire, is chaos incarnate. Every victory is followed by suspicion, every new face a possible enemy. Yet, in the clatter of moving cannon and the calculated trajectory of a shell, there is certainty. There is math. There is predictability. What does he want next? Not conquest, not the throne, not even recognition. The future is unformed clay. Glory is an accident. He stares at the candle's flame burning low and dreams not of palaces but of clarity. A world where a small adjustment means the difference between ruin and triumph, where careful planning brings victory, where power answers to intellect. I want the world to make sense when I touch it. A whispered confession, honest, almost childlike. In the light of destruction, he cleaves to that idea, sense, reason, the possibility of shaping chaos to his will. He folds his notes. His boots crunch over the dirt as he steps back out into the endless, hungry wind. Tonight, in Toulon, history turns quietly, on the axis of a single hill. And in the shadow of battered cannons and the hopes of a fractured nation, a young man's vision begins its relentless march.
The cold creeps in through the stone walls, slow and insistent, weaving itself into every corner of the dormitory. It lies under the beds, seeps into thin blankets, tucks itself in with each restless sleeper. In the darkness, moonlight barely seeps through the shuttered windows, fractured and blue. The hum of night is not silence. It's the echo of breathing, the delicate shifting of bodies lost in their dreams, the heavy breaths and whispered names that linger only in memory. Napoleon remains awake. Again, sleep slips away from him the way warmth does in winter, reluctant, incomplete. On his narrow cot, he is motionless but alert, his hands on his chest, fingers twitching as if testing the air for possibility. The ceiling above him is rough with shadows, but in his mind, it becomes a vast, uncharted sky. His eyes are open, always open, seeing more in darkness than the others do in daylight. There's a rhythm to his stillness. He listens to the wind pressing its palm against ancient shutters, making them rattle with secrets from beyond the academy walls. He hears the beams above, creaking with age and with the quiet weight of many long, unremarkable nights. He hears the hush beneath the boy's breathing, the living, breathing presence of anticipation. He listens to his own thoughts, as methodical and certain as footsteps down an empty corridor. They fall into place, each one building on the last, constructing a path only Napoleon knows how to follow. Outside, the world carries on, careless and immense. The city shapes its dreams without ever knowing his name. The stars wheel above, unhurried. But inside this night, inside this body and mind, something is happening. Something is being built out of vision, out of will, out of the relentless refusal to be only what he has been told he is. In the slender hours before dawn, he rises, quiet as the cold itself. He moves through stone hallways lined with the ghosts of old victories and faded banners. His boots echo. He is 15 and growing into the edge of himself. Narrow shoulders, sharp cheekbones, eyes that miss nothing. His uniform is almost right now, the fabric clinging to his restlessness, the stiffness in his back unbending even when he sits alone. Others cluster in the warmth of camaraderie, shuffling cards, murmuring over hands of luck and laughter and rivalry, the currency of their friendship. They trade stories, flirt with adventure and innocence, and allow night to soften their ambitions. Napoleon holds their games at a remove. He keeps his counsel and his company to himself, his solitude complete but never lonely. Books sprawl across his desk, maps unrolled with care and annotated in a meticulous hand. His fingers trace the paths of rivers and ridges, the sweep of campaigns fought by men who refused the boundaries of their birth. He draws arrows, circles strongholds, studies flanks and terrain. It is not a child's play, but a schooling in possibility. The world's shape is not fixed. It can be altered, seized, remade by those who see its lines more clearly, while others memorize names. He learns how the land itself sways the outcome of empires. While others glance at dates, he reconstructs the necessary steps that led Alexander onward, Caesar upward, kings and commanders forward or backward, according to chance or to skill. He doesn't believe in luck. Sometimes Napoleon sits at the edge of gatherings, the flickering lamplight catching the intense set of his jaw. He listens more than he speaks, collecting stray words, watching faces, tracing the edges of alliances. Their laughter and posturing do not touch him, but he catalogues them like pieces on a board, each one potentially moved, each one an obstacle or an opportunity. He knows he is not strong enough to command with force. He is not charming enough to win with easy words, but he is quietly, dangerously observant, and observation itself, when sharpened into understanding, is its own form of power. The days march on in exercises and drills, and the books fill with notations and dreams. Occasionally the weight of routine lifts, and there comes a moment, unexpected, unmistakable, when talent reveals itself. Napoleon stands before a black chalkboard, numbers and angles, trajectories and distances. The solution coalesces in his mind, clear as water, and he writes it out without hesitation. There is a pause, almost disbelieving. Then respect, sudden and silent, tightens around the room. For the first time a peer nods to him, to Napoleon Bonaparte, the strange Corsican with the sharp mind and unwavering gaze. He does not show it on his face, but in the deep quiet of his quarters, he lets the moment linger. In his notebook, in the cramped, hurried sweep of his pen, he writes, "What is a man? A plan, held long enough." He underlines it, twice. Already he understands. History bends for those who persist. At night, when the darkness spreads thick as oil, he sits with his blanket drawn over his shoulders and revisits the future. He whispers names to himself in the ancient hush. Toulon, Austerlitz, Marengo. Campaigns that have not yet claimed their autumn in the histories. Battles that exist for now only in the dim fire of his imagination. But he sees them, sees the sunlight flashing on bayonets, the smoke rolling over hills, the distant, thunderous march of destiny. He feels the beats of victory in his blood, rehearses each maneuver in the quiet theater of his mind. He is not content to wait and see what man, history, will make him into. He grasps at the clay of possibility with restless fingers, turning over strategies, perfecting tactics, inventing a self bold enough to carve its own story. Some wait for the world to reveal itself. Napoleon decides, again and again, to be the one who uncovers, designs, directs. In the flickering glow of imagined battles, Napoleon Bonaparte is neither merely a boy in a cold dormitory, nor yet the emperor whose name will outlive the stones of this old academy. He inhabits the space between, transfigured by vision, trembling on the verge of action, awake while all others sleep. Each page of his notebook is a map, each annotation a rehearsal. Already, he is preparing to stride beyond these ancient walls. The storm is gathering, quiet for now, its force still learning how to walk. But soon, the world will know that Napoleon was here, shivering in the darkness, that he was already building, out of silence and cold, the fire he would one day unleash. The fire settles into a steady hush, soft embers glowing red at the hearth's edge. In this narrow Parisian room, history itself holds its breath. Outside, the city is unsteady, unmoored from the anchor of its kings, adrift in revolution and searching for meaning among the rubble and blood. But within these faded walls, there is only the scratch of a quill across handmade paper, and the slow, uneven heartbeat of a man alone. Napoleon sits hunched before his desk, not as the conqueror carved into marble, nor the shaper of destinies etched onto endless fields of Europe, but as a man carved out by longing. His hair, always so carefully arranged in public, now falls in loose curls about his forehead, shadowed by candlelight. The greatcoat, so heavy with medals and meaning, lies forgotten on the back of a spindle-legged chair. Here there's no need for ceremony or armor. His enemies tonight are not nations, but memories and desires. You watch as he lifts his quill, pausing, searching for words both precise and tender. He is so gentle in this act, a tenderness few will ever see. The ink stains on his fingers betray hours spent in words, in confessions, in the endless striving for connection that no campaign map could ever plot. All around, the air holds the quiet anticipation of unfinished sentences. The walls, scuffed and dim, guard these confessions with a lover's discretion. The thin blue of night climbs in through the window, mixing with the amber from his lamp. His sentences spill out hesitantly at first, then with gathering urgency. Each phrase is a wound disguised as poetry. You see him in the moment before the world turns its gaze upon him, not as an emperor, but as a man overwhelmed by yearning, unable to restrain himself in love as he does in strategy. His love for Josephine, an affection so consuming it startles him, is unlike any discipline he has known. He, who commands armies and overturns governments, finds his surest defeat in the absence of her touch. With her, he is undone. He sees her in every flicker of light, imagines her scent in the night air, the curve of her shoulder haunting his dreams with the crisp clarity of battle lines at dawn. She moves through his thoughts with the imperiousness of a queen, a woman who will not bow to him either on the battlefield or in the boudoir. She is older, more practiced in the ways of flirtation and intrigue. Her life is lived in laughter and silk, in subtle power and unspoken promises. She has known how to wound before he ever drew his first sword, and yet, to him, she is more than just a lover. She is the axis upon which his private world turns. He knows, as everyone in Paris seems to know, that she does not wait for him in puritanical devotion. Even now, perhaps, she is basking in applause at an evening salon, her wit as sharp as any blade, or dancing under the flickering chandeliers of a grand townhouse, her smile meant for someone else. He grows jealous, but it is a helpless, childish kind of jealousy, one he can neither solve nor surrender, and so he writes, not to bind her with promises, not to force her fidelity, but simply because he must, because each day without her is a little bit less alive, and each letter is an imperfect attempt to bridge the impossible distance between her world and his heart. He writes of longing, naked and unadorned. He writes of nights suffused with her perfume, of the heat of her skin, of the raw and clumsy hunger that makes him feel both foolish and alive. His words betray no tactical maneuver, no calculated retreat, only honesty, aching and uncloaked. In these moments, he is a man stripped of all armor. He confesses, "Since I left you, I have been constantly depressed. My happiness is to be near you." You can feel the ache in the words, as though he wishes to collapse the very miles that separate them, to pull her through ink and paper and into his arms. He cannot command it into being. There is no strategy for desire, no barricade against missing her. He writes, too, of the physical, the memory of her touch, the echo of her laughter in his ear, the scent she leaves behind. Don't wash. I want to smell you. With a soldier's urgency and a lover's delicacy, the boundaries between longing and need blur. There is no dignity here, only truth. It is in this act, these confessions unburdened on the page, that Napoleon is most vulnerable, not before rows of muskets, nor in the council halls, but here at his desk, heart wide open, hoping words might substitute for presence. The letter, once sealed and addressed, sits trembling in his hand. He hesitates before releasing it, as though parting with it is another kind of absence. He places it carefully among the others, an archive of hope and hurt. After, he rises to pace the narrow floor, footsteps muffled by worn rugs, the lines on his face deeper in the shifting light. He murmurs to himself, not orders, nor remembered speeches, but fragments of her name, stray thoughts of what he would say if she stood before him, if only she could truly know him, the man behind the myth. From the window, Paris is a dark, breathing thing, its roofs glistening with rain, the weight of uncertainty hanging over every street. Somewhere out there, tonight, she exists, unreachable, radiant, unconstrained. He stares into the night, his reflection lost in the glass, and wonders if she ever thinks of him with the same helpless hunger. The coming years will bring distance and betrayal, disappointment, and the slow unraveling of their trust. The faith he puts in her will falter, wear thin with time and separation. They will break each other's hearts with the small, careless cruelties of absence, of busy lives lived apart. But this night, in this fire-lit room, none of that matters. Right now, he risks everything for the hope of her reply. He is a conqueror, utterly conquered, and the world outside, the city in revolution, the battles waiting on distant frontiers, fades to nothing before the quiet, helpless strength of what he feels. Here, the general lays down his arms. Here, the emperor is only a man. Here, alone in the glow of a dying fire, Napoleon closes his eyes and surrenders, not to defeat, but to love, an adversary no soldier can ever outflank. Muddy boots leave streaks where marble once shone, but that doesn't matter to Napoleon Bonaparte, nor to the men who walk in step with him across the wind-swept camps of northern Italy in 1796. The banners above their tents are tattered, and their uniforms scarcely fit for glory. Yet the air buzzes with something more potent than mere hope. Every footstep falls heavy with fatigue, hunger gnawing their bellies, the wet leather of their boots slick against skin, rubbed raw. The French army, worn thin by months of hardship, is at the edge of exhaustion, a force underfed, outnumbered, overmatched. And still within the lines and amongst the weary, there is a center of gravity drawing all eyes. When Napoleon speaks, the smoke and soil of the camp freeze for a moment. His voice, clear as cold water on a mountain morning, breaks through the endless complaints and doubts. He does not shout. He does not brood. He simply speaks in tones stripped clean of flattery or empty promises. His men do not follow out of blind loyalty to rank, nor because they are charmed by a smile or flattered with hollow words. They follow because he gives them direction, a compass when the road disappears beneath mud and blood. Walking among the soldiers in his habitual coat, gray and threadbare, Napoleon's boots are scuffed from rough marches, his shoulders squared not by arrogance, but by resolve. He nods to the rank and file, recalling names, faces, the stories of wounds and origins. Hunger, he tells them, is something not just to endure, but to transform. It sharpens their spirit, forges their resolve. The government cannot feed them, nor clothe them, nor pay them in anything but thin hope. But in these men, Napoleon recognizes something bright, a faith not in dreams of glory, but in the certainty of action. He stands atop a makeshift podium, surveying a sea of faces lit by flickering torchlight. Soldiers, you are naked, ill-fed. The government owes you much, but can give you nothing. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. There you will find honor, glory, and wealth. The words are not honeyed. They are flint, struck to spark ambition. In the silence that follows, one senses conviction settling into bone. So they move, as one, into Italy, a battered column, pressing into a land rich with possibility and defended by seasoned armies. Napoleon, so recently a name among names, begins his ascent to legend. The generals who sit in Paris with polished boots and unsoiled cuffs pore over maps and shake their heads. The Austrians are strong. The Alps are merciless. France should not win. But Napoleon does not treat maps as gospel. He sketches over them with his own plans, bending the future to his design. At Montenotte, he analyzes the field with a gambler's calm, splitting the enemy before they're fully awake. At Lodi, he leads the charge himself, striding across a narrow bridge with musket balls splitting water and air. Witnesses will later swear they saw death hesitate, confusion flickering in cannon smoke, because Napoleon stood where no one had dared, facing devastation, but bending it to his will. His men, emboldened, surge forward, carrying not just his orders, but his certainty. In campaign after campaign, he accomplishes what seems impossible. Larger armies break before his compact columns. It's not luck. It's not supernatural genius. It's the discipline of momentum, using speed, surprise, and precision to unsettle opponents. Napoleon fights not against where his enemies are entrenched, but anticipates where they will try to be, catching them off balance, toppling each certainty with a swift practiced motion. Between battles, in the meager comforts of campaign life, Napoleon writes letters home. To Paris, his dispatches are laced with praise for his soldiers, rarely for himself. He knows need, pride, fear, and ambition are flames that must be stoked carefully. Yet, In the privacy of his journal, a striking admission glimmers. I have found my rhythm. I am no longer afraid. Reading these words, one senses the quiet forging of a leader's spirit, a man who has stepped through the limits of self-doubt. The campaign's end finds Napoleon standing not amidst carnage, but in triumph. Milan, city of arches and stone, falls beneath his boots. The echoes of ancient emperors resound through colonnades, now filled with the cheers of liberated citizens and the names of the dead. Women cast flowers at his feet. Artists beg to immortalize his face. Yet Napoleon rarely pauses to bask. He accepts their adulation almost absently, eyes fixed ahead, already plotting the next step. Ever restless, his mind drifting to strategy and the road yet untraveled. His correspondence with Josephine, left behind in Paris, is a testament to longing and frustration, passion and distance. Each letter reveals more than instructions or affections. It is a man split between his need for conquest and for personal connection. She is slow to reply, the tempo of her affections unreliable. Still, he signs each missive the same way. Your husband, who kisses you even in dreams. Between dreams, though, are battles, and between battles, purpose. Napoleon is not content to merely conquer. In Italy, he sets about restructuring the very bones of society, toppling monarchs, establishing republics, sending crates of captured art and treasures back to France. Yet these are not simply spoils. They are signals, proof that from chaos, something ordered and new can rise. Order, he insists, is the ultimate victory, to make enduring sense out of the debris of war. One night, you watch as he walks alone into a cathedral, ruined by weeks of fighting. Shards of colored glass glitter in the moonlight, pews burned hollow. His boots rasp against the stone. You ask what he sees in such ruin. He answers quietly, not with pride, but with revelation. This used to be God's house. Now it's mine. The words are not blasphemy, but awakening. It is the realization that fate is not inherited. It is seized. Napoleon in Italy is not a proof of destiny, but of decision. He is an architect of purpose, a man reshaping the world through audacity and choice, not entitlement. In these first campaigns he finds his calling, the knowledge that if one dares to decide boldly, the limits of the world can be tested, bent, and with enough force of will, rewritten entirely. In the mud, the hunger, the ache of battle, something endures. Not marble, but movement. Not inheritance, but decision. And it is here, in the cold and the chaos, that the hands writing history first realize their own strength. The Egyptian twilight hangs like a veil between two worlds, the world of men, measured in days and deeds, and the world of antiquity, measured in centuries weighed down by memory. Here, the sun slips below the horizon, not as a gentle curtain call, but as a retreat from a heat so absolute it scorches illusions into the very air. Every footprint in the sand is stolen by the wind. Every shadow dances across stone that once knew the glory of gods. Napoleon's boots touch this world with the boldness of a conqueror. Yet under that boldness lies something rawer. Curiosity, hunger for the infinite. The distant silhouette of Cairo is veiled in gold and dust. He stands at the edge of Europe looking inward, toward the ghosts of Egypt's rulers. their pyramids, their avenues of sphinxes, their temples whose hieroglyphs no living soul remembers how to read. The weight of time presses inward from every direction. When he addresses his soldiers, those men hungry for their own legends, the words are less for them than for himself. From the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you. 4,000 years, countless dynasties, all staring back from those stone monuments with impassive eyes. To stand beneath their gaze is to feel insignificant, and yet to desire greatness before them is the beginning of ambition's madness. But Napoleon's genius, the one that history will remember, is not just a proficiency for war. It is the ability to see the invisible threads that bind victory to immortality. Other generals pillage. He gathers knowledge and narrative. With his army come Europe's brightest minds, men armed with pens, chisels, paint, and an unquenched thirst to decipher what the sands have hidden. Their mission is as monumental as Alexander's, yet far more subtle. Not just conquest, but resurrection. Every day these scholars set out, notebooks in hand, hats shading their eyes from the blinding glare. They measure the great Sphinx, fingers tracing its pitted cheeks. They follow local guides into tombs, the air growing cool and heavy with the perfume of history and dust. They sketch the falcon-headed Horus, the painted coffers of Seti, the forlorn grandeur of Karnak's towering columns. The sweat on their brows mingles with excitement, for beneath their fingertips is a world untouched since Rome was in its infancy. Somewhere along the bank of the Nile, amid a crumbling fortress, they chance upon an unlikely prize, a slab of black granodiorite, inscribed in 3 scripts. The Rosetta Stone, 1 inscription, 3 languages, one of them ancient Greek. It dawns on them that this is the cipher, the bridge, the missing grammar of an empire whose voice has been lost for ages. The excitement is palpable. Here, in the palm of French hands, lies the possibility to make the dead speak. Napoleon himself listens as they argue over meanings, scribble translations, debate the origins of gods and kings. They are building not just an understanding, but a legacy, a myth that Frenchmen, for a brief moment, became inheritors of Egyptian wisdom. Through translation, through scholarship, Napoleon aspires to conquer what no army has before, the meaning of civilization itself. Yet Egypt, ancient and merciless, will not yield so easily. The French are strangers here. The people watch them with wary contempt. The desert, impervious, eats away at their lines. French shoes rot. Water rations run thin. Stone fortresses become ovens by noon. Ice boxes by midnight. And then comes the news from the coast. At Aboukir Bay, shadows flecked with fire, a sudden and shattering violence. The British fleet, under Admiral Nelson, obliterates the French navy. One by one, masts splinter and keels burst open. The Nile is a river of flame, reflecting a sky that crackles with cannon fire. Bonaparte's path home is sunk beneath the waves, and the sound of retreat is drowned by the silences that follow disaster. Afterward, Napoleon sits alone in his tent, beneath canvas lit by wavering lamplight. The air holds the sting of burning ships, charred wood, and the dusty exhaustion of a campaign gone sideways. Maps litter the table, but his gaze is fixed on a point beyond their borders, on something more inward and less certain. We are alone now. That is the beginning. The words are for the darkness, for the sand that patters against the canvas as if demanding entry. His officers suspect nothing. He affects optimism, plays the part of the destined leader, but in these silent hours, cracks appear. He feels the echo of a defeat that cannot be dressed up as opportunity. The story, his story, France's story, threatens to unravel against the unyielding reality of Egypt. Yet even as the veneer fails, he writes long letters to Paris, heavy with careful omissions, love notes to Josephine, filled with longing and hope, pages addressed only to himself, containing fears he'll never reveal. The act of writing is itself an act of will, a refusal to be forgotten, even as events turn against him. One night, seeking solace, he wanders the ruins of an ancient temple. The stars are knives behind scudding clouds. The columns rise as wounded fingers. All around is the debris of belief, altars to names once spoken in earnest. He stops before a shattered statue, runs his hands across the worn-out face. No worshippers remain, no memory of this god's triumphs. Yet the name, chiseled deep, endures, outliving prayers, fires, and even the meaning of the words. Napoleon reflects, even gods fade, but names remain if carved deep enough. The silence afterward says more than the words. The ultimate lesson of empire is not always in victory, but in leaving a mark indelible, even as time erases the rest. To be remembered is its own kind of conquest, as you follow him back through the blowing sand, wind whipping away any trace of your passage. You sense ambition's fire is undimmed. The dream persists, transformed by adversity, forged hotter by loss. The desert strips away delusions, but in the heart of mankind's greatest would-be emperor burns a desire that refuses to cool, a vision not of fleeting triumphs, but of belonging to the ages. Egypt has not been conquered, but its memory has entered him, and for a moment he walks among pyramids older than memory, seeking not dominion, but eternity.
There is a peculiar stillness at the water's edge, a hush too solemn for the arrival of any general, let alone one whose name sings with either reverence or dread in every corner of France. Here, at the docks, there is no fanfare, no blaring horns, no jubilant crowds straining against the line to catch a glimpse of a returning hero. Instead, the world contracts to the lowering sky, the slap of sails breaking the rhythmless silence, the moan of timbers, the faint creak of leather boots on wet planks. Napoleon steps onto French soil, not as the triumphant Caesar the people once cheered, but something leaner, hungrier, honed by loss and the biting winds of the Egyptian desert. His overcoat hangs heavy with dust and memory, the face above it drawn and intent, as if already seeing beyond the shadows of the key to what lies ahead. It is 1799. The world, as Napoleon Bonaparte knows it, is shifting. Quieter, perhaps, but more dangerous for its fog of uncertainty. The Directory, that fragile system conjured from the fevered dreams of revolution, is crumbling in the hands of men better suited to theory than rule. Power is no longer held, only borrowed, shuffled between nervous hands in back rooms perfumed with desperation and ink. Parisians sense it in the air. Change, brittle and fierce, coming on the wind with the same inevitability as the coming cold. You walk with him through the city, through narrow alleys where dawn glimmers against rain-slick stones, past the yawning market stalls and the shuttered homes of men and women weary from promises that have withered into suspicion. Cold, yes. The autumn wind nips at the cuffs of his threadbare uniform. But colder still are the watchful eyes flicking across him from alleyways, from shop fronts, from the uneasy throngs who whisper as Napoleon passes. Some remember the miracle at Arcole, the surge, the thunder of cannon, the country saved from enemies within and without. Others recall only defeat, banners lost to sandstorms, ships scattered or sunk in distant bays, rumors spinning in circles around the general's silent return. Napoleon does not offer comfort nor apology. His presence is enough, a challenge, a promise. He walks with purpose, but not haste, through the veins of a city holding its breath, turning every gesture and silence into a signal. At night, in borrowed rooms lit by the trembling flame of a single lamp, you watch him bend over parchment, his quill etching polite invitations that mask an edge sharper than any blade. Discuss stability. Preserve the Republic. The script is careful, the language soft, but the meaning runs like a current of steel beneath the surface. He calls forth men like Sieyès and Talleyrand, architects of compromise, masters of maneuver, their faces pinched and eager, believing they summon a weapon to wield. They mistake his silence for compliance, assume the tiredness in his eyes is defeat. They do not see the fire that smolders there, nor the tally he keeps, quietly, of every promise made and broken in the Republic's name. In gilded rooms, the meetings begin, hushed, weighted with purpose. Sieyès wants a sword. Talleyrand wants a lever. Neither anticipates the hand that will grip the hilt, the will that bends every lever to its owner. Napoleon listens, his voice rarely rising above a murmur. He is patient. He is inevitable. And then, as the first frost whitens the edge of Paris, the plot quickens. The 18th of Brumaire. Dates have little meaning now, the very calendar torn and remade to suit the times. Soldiers, drawn by loyalty and fear, cluster at crossroads and fill courtyards lit by grim November light. The halls of the legislature, once echoing with passionate debate, are now tense with confusion and suspicion. Word passes like a spark, the general has arrived. He stands at the chamber's threshold, coat flung open, shadowed eyes meeting the massed gaze of lawmakers desperate to hold on to what little remains of their power. One voice, shrill with panic, cries out, "Down with the tyrant!" Others pound their fists on ancient wood, making noise, doing nothing. Napoleon does not argue. He does not need to. The true measure of authority is already sealed, not in speeches, but in the ranks crowding outside, the bayonets glinting at every door. The lawmakers bluster, collapse, resign. The Republic dies not in a rain of bullets, but with the stroke of a pen and the trembling signatures of men whose courage failed at the crucial hour. In its place rises the consulate. A triumvirate, they say, but history is never written by committee. There is power in the room now that has never known division. That evening, as the city holds its breath, you sit in a tall, drafty room, at the center of a new order. Papers scatter across the desk, maps, proclamations, letters yet to be sealed, while Napoleon stands at the window, letting the cold sting his face. He does not allow himself the luxury of victory. There are no cheers here, no triumphant toasts, just the frown of memory and the tug of dreams not yet made real. He bends once more over his map, its borders shifting beneath his gaze, the ink still wet, the future as uncertain as the wind shrilling through Parisian streets. Josephine enters, quiet on slippered feet, the echo of absences palpable between them. She brushes her lips across his cheek, and for a flicker of a heartbeat, the general is simply a man, alone, uncertain, longing for anchors stronger than any state. He closes his eyes, weary, then opens them. He returns to the tasks at hand, the lines to redraw, the armies to recall, the vision that will carry him not merely to power, but to history. France stands before him now, bruised, battered, but his. The streets outside hum with rumors, with hope, with fear. But inside these walls, Napoleon sees only the next campaign, the next horizon. For him, this is not the end, but the beginning. The first hill crested, many more to climb, and beyond them, the shape of an empire waiting to be made. This is Napoleon's return, silent, unyielding, already dreaming the world anew.
Paris trembles under an iron gray sky. the breath of winter seeping into stone and silence. On this December morning, the city gathers at the heart of itself, the Notre Dame Cathedral, a sanctuary transformed into the theater of a nation's turning. The bells resound, their slow, heavy peals swirling through vaulted arches, summoning the past, marking the present, foretelling what is to come. Gold seeps through the streets, curling into the alcoves and gathering in the corners of worried minds. The people do not clamor. Today, Paris simply waits, caught between the world that was and the world about to be. Inside the cathedral, gold accents every surface, pooling along the curves of arches and swirling in the dim candlelight. Gilded details blur in the haze of incense rising from censers, sweet and thick on the tongue. Crimson velvet covers altar steps, while heavy emerald banners hang from balconies, 1,000 stitches shimmering with the promise, or threat, of continuity or change. The air is dense with power and the weight of expectation. Bishops fuss with their embroidered vestments, their faces pinched above stiff collars. Courtiers, wearing shoes so fine they barely brush the floor, shift their feet with a kind of nervous grace. Papal emissaries murmur in Latin, heads bent together like conspirators. The great and the powerful, the old nobility and the new, all stand shoulder to shoulder, uncertain where they belong in this new breathing moment. And there, at the far end of the aisle, under a sky of stained glass, Napoleon begins his walk. Each step is measured, neither rushed nor dragging. The laurel wreath, ancient, Roman, a whisper of centuries, rests upon his brow. His robe, crimson silk trimmed with ermine, flows behind him, a river of imperial intent. It drags neither humility nor grandeur, only inevitability. His posture is perfect, upright, but not strained. His eyes fixed not on the people, nor the altar, but on some invisible horizon, one that only he can see. He moves with the air of a man for whom this journey is both historic and utterly ordinary, as if every night for the last decade he has already walked this path in dreams and ambition. Trumpets sound, at first a gentle, distant echo, swelling as he draws nearer to the altar where the pontiff waits. Pope Pius VII stands robed in gold, hands cupped around the heavy crown destined for the new emperor. The world contracts, breath held close to the bone as the moment bends and sets, a symbol of centuries, a ritual as old as power itself. But as Napoleon approaches the top step, those watching sense the shift, a current beneath the surface, gathering force. There is no kneeling, no supplication, no deference. He does not wait for the Pope. Instead, with steady hands and eyes that do not seek permission, he lifts the crown from the Pope's outstretched arms and raises it high. For a heartbeat, all of Europe waits in that silent cathedral. Bishops, generals, rivals, all frozen, he crowns himself. Metal touches flesh, a simple gesture, magnificent in its audacity and finality. The silence that follows feels sharp, almost dangerous. It is not the silence of outrage or even surprise. It is the silence of realization, a collective drawing of breath, as centuries of custom are swept away in a single motion. This ceremony is no coronation in the old sense. It is a statement carved in living history. Napoleon owes his power to no man, no church, no lineage, save that which he has built himself. The unbroken chain of monarchs and priests ends here, replaced by the will and resolve of a single figure. His message is unmistakable. His authority is his own, subject to no higher claim. Josephine, beautiful, uncertain, the partner of his rise, kneels at his feet. The room holds its breath again as Napoleon lowers a smaller crown onto her brow. His touch is almost gentle, a flicker of vulnerability in a day constructed for dominance. Their eyes meet for a moment, not as husband and wife, not even as emperor and empress, but as two souls who have weathered ambition's long, bitter storm. The ceremony, for all its grandeur, feels faintly unreal. France, watching from beyond the cathedral's doors, does not rejoice with dancing or cheers. Instead, there is a hush, fear and wonder wound into the fabric of the day. The boy from Corsica, once Napoleon Bonaparte, now Napoleon I, Emperor of the French, wears the crown. But to the people, this is not a promise of peace. It is a signal of movement, of campaigns yet begun, of wars that will shape the continent's fate. Later, behind the high walls, away from the golden haze and incense, Napoleon is alone. The laurel wreath rests atop a simple table, its ancient leaves mute witnesses to the cost of greatness. Here, when no eyes linger and the silence is true, he exhales, a long, slow release, tension unwinding from bone and sinew. The weight of every battle, every betrayal, every choice presses down upon him. Glory has its price, and even now, in the hour carved out for triumph, his mind is elsewhere. The world outside these walls presses close. Austria gathering, Prussia waiting, England always glinting on the horizon like a blade. The crown does not dull his restlessness. It sharpens it, demands more. Maps sprawl before him, covered in ink and vision. The theater of Europe still in flux. Allies to bind, enemies to outmaneuver, empires to test, and boundaries to redraw. The throne was never a destination, only another stage in the journey, another lever to set in motion, so France does not erupt with joy. Her people understand. Tonight, as the winter chill deepens and candles gutter in their sockets, they know this is not an end, but a beginning. The hush in the cathedral echoes in 1,000 homes, a mixture of faith, fear, and the knowledge that power, once taken in such a manner, does not rest. Deep beneath the layers of velvet and gold, beneath the laurel and the metals, sits a mind always turning. Napoleon is not content to stand still. He is always watching, always calculating, always waiting for the world to move, so he can move first, move fastest, move farther than anyone believes possible. And so, on this day marked by bells and silence, glory and unease, a new chapter opens, not with the crowning of an emperor, but with the declaration of a will that will shape the world, as long as its bearer is willing to bear the cost. Cold, absolute, insistent cold, lays a hush on the world, suffocating even the memory of warmth. There is no wind to blame, no roaring storm to curse. The air itself is a curtain, heavy and unmoving, stitched together from unspoken fears and the icy breath of an endless Russian winter. Every step creaks beneath the weight of history, and that history is brittle, frostbitten, and shattering underfoot. The earth is not lost beneath the snow. It is entombed. Fields that once rippled with green are buried in white silence. Forests that once sang with birds, and life now stand gaunt and jarred, black fingers poking up through the snow as if in mute accusation. Nothing moves easily here. Even time seems unable to pass. It hovers, suspended with the snow, in the spaces between heartbeats. The journey that began in splendor has withered into endurance. 600,000 men crossed into Russia, their boots polished, their spirits buoyed by the certainty of conquest. They were a river of drums and banners, the greatest army Europe had ever seen, refined by years of victory, untouchable in their confidence. But wars are not won by numbers carved into stone or names inscribed upon banners. Wars are won and lost in the silence between footsteps, in the private bargains struck with cold and fear. The Grande Armée has been reduced, not through battle, but in the slow erasures of attrition. For every musket, a dozen are lost to sickness or starvation, to the cold that seeps into bones and never leaves. Horses collapse, their flanks heaving. They are abandoned, their bodies slowly vanishing beneath the same snow that threatens their riders. The wagons, once loaded with weapons and supplies, are now filled with the wounded and the dying, faces blank, eyes hollow, mouths too frozen to plead for water. Napoleon walks among them, not the distant conqueror, but a man encased in the silence he has created. Once, he wore gold and power like armor. Now, frost encrusts his lapels, and he moves with a heavier step, each pace another admission that ambition cannot outmarch the elements. He no longer surveys maps with the certainty of a chess master. The lines inked on paper have lost their meaning here. The enemy is not a general with an army at his back. The enemy is everywhere, in the air, in the ground, in the very breath. Orders, when they are given, float out muffled in scarves, barely louder than the whispers of death that ride the windless night. Soldiers fall where they stand. Some do not even struggle, too numb for the luxury of hope. The lucky ones ride in the wagons. If luck it can be called to live a little longer in agony. Behind them, all along the path, are mile markers made of bones, silent testaments to promises never kept and dreams lost to the killing cold. Every night, the fires burn lower, the circle of warmth shrinking. Men cluster tightly, their backs to the heat and their faces cast in hollow light. Rations are scarce. What food remains as hard as stone, bread that must be thawed before it can be bitten, and even then it does little to sustain. Water comes in the form of melting snow, boiled when possible, but always tinged with an aftertaste of wood smoke and futility. In the flickering shadow of the flames, the past seems both near and infinitely distant. Only months ago, victory lay within grasp. Moscow, the jewel and the key, had fallen to his stride. But Moscow was no prize. It was a city in flames, its riches consumed, its hopes scoured away by fire. The Russians had left nothing for him except the smoke that clung to his skin and the silence that now presses upon his heart. Turning back is not a march, but a retreat, a slow, grim slog back down the frozen arteries of Russia. The enemy has changed form. There are no roaring cannons, but the ice sharpens its own kind of blade. It scores their faces raw and fills their lungs with daggers. Frost gnaws at boot leather, eats through gloves, and devours the last remnants of discipline. Men talk only when necessary, and then with the barest remnants of language. Any noise is an affront to the silence, which hangs like a judgment over all. Napoleon himself is solitary. Even surrounded by survivors, he seems entirely alone. His officers look to him, hoping for certainty, for strength to match the ragged hope they clutch to themselves. He meets their eyes rarely now, his attention turned inward, or perhaps simply elsewhere, where the summer grass was green, where the banners never froze, where the world was something one could hold and shape with willpower alone. One night, as you sit beside him, the little flames of the fire trace out memories, and you feel the ache of time in every glowing ember. There is little talk. The Emperor's expression gives nothing away, but you see his hands shaking, just the tiniest tremor, barely visible in the dim light. It is not fear. It is the exhaustion that comes after the last hope is spent. At last, he offers a whisper, words slipping from him with the weariness of defeat. From the sublime to the ridiculous, there is but one step. The words linger, heavy with the weight of everything he has lost. He does not rage against fate. He does not cry out. Instead, he remembers. All that is left of empire, of dreams, is memory. Each recollection another step away from what he was and toward what he has become. In the brief privacy of his battered journal, he sets down a final confession. The snow teaches what the sword never could. It is a lesson learned in the marrow, in the cold, unanswerable silence between victories. So the march goes on, through a landscape stripped of mercy and meaning, until even the strongest legs begin to falter. Behind them, Russia closes the door. Ahead, only the hope of escape, of survival, of someday telling the story. The world has been rewritten, not by generals or kings, but by the quiet persistence of cold, by snow, by silence, by the slow surrender of certainty to the infinite gray, and in the heart of that silence, a single, aching truth remains. There are battles that will never be recounted in tales of courage and glory, battles where the victors are simply those who endure, where the only witness is the snow, and where all the power in the world cannot change the way winter claims its due. The wind that sweeps in from the Mediterranean carries more than salt. There's something alive within it, something unsettled. It's as if the air itself has learned to bristle, charged with memory and possibility. Against this backdrop, a solitary figure emerges from exile, setting his boots into the cold sands of southern France. The world may not welcome Napoleon with the sound of drums or the glint of parades, but his return is thunderous all the same, a promise whispered across Europe, impossible to ignore. March 1815. The date lingers in the chill of dawn, heavy with the weight of what has come before and the uncertainty of what might yet unfold. Behind Napoleon, the sea closes quietly, erasing his path from Elba. Before him, the land stretches far, dusty roads winding northward through mountains and mist, all the way to Paris. The heart of France beats faintly, waiting to see if memory alone can pull a man back from oblivion. You walk beside him at first, near Gulf Juan. No one stops to marvel. There are no great crowds, only a scattering of villagers and fishermen, their mouths agape at the sight. The man who once stood atop Europe's empires walks as any traveler might, steady, purposeful, determined. He shields his eyes from the rising sun, but his vision is fixed on something farther, a city that has tried to forget him, a nation poised on the cusp of change. Along the twisting roads, the landscape itself seems to hesitate. A pause in time, a breath held. In sleepy valleys where wildflowers grow, in villages with shuttered windows and sleeping dogs, whispers begin to rise. Each step forward is an invitation for hope and for fear, because when the news spreads that Napoleon is back, out of exile, free, alive, he becomes more legend than man. Every town square is a theater, every crowded street a stage. Locals gather by the dozen, peering over carts and from behind walls, searching for any sign that the stories are true. Some disbelieve, recalling how the maps had already been redrawn without him. Others feel a strange stirring, a recognition more visceral than reason. And always, when he passes by, his face older now, marked by defeat, yet undimmed, something remarkable happens. Memory cracks open, and loyalty surges from its depths. First comes a lone soldier, then a regiment, then entire battalions awakening from the slumber of peace. The tricolor, once buried under bourbon white, is raised anew. The colors seem more vivid than before, untouched by compromise or defeat. The royalists, sworn to block his path, find themselves confronted not by an army, but by a single man. He steps into their line of fire, chest bared, voice carrying over the stillness. If any of you will shoot your emperor, here I am. The guns never fire. A strange silence settles as men lower their muskets, and relief gives way to raucous cheers. The land itself appears to yield, as if recognizing an old claim. Town after town opens its gates to him. The king, sensing the earth shifting beneath his feet, flees without a fight. The revolution is bloodless, astonishing. No barricades, no executions, only the strength of an idea, returning to reclaim what had been lost. For France, it seems, has chosen to remember what once was, an age not merely of conquest, but of certainty. Within the echo of his footsteps, men and women recall endless campaigns, the celestial order of his lines, the impossible victories pulled from mud and fog. Napoleon's empire had been as much about belief as power, a conviction that anything might be possible if only pushed far enough. So when he arrives again in Paris, this time without armies or treasure, the city opens to him as to a prodigal ruler. In courtyards and cafes, the conversations ring with that strange mixture of excitement and anxiety, as if the whole nation knows it stands on the threshold of something irreversible. 100 days. It is all the time he will have, pressed between memory and destiny. Yet he spends every precious moment with relentless energy. Letters flow from his study by the hundreds, directives, invitations, threats, apologies. The old generals return, drawn as if by gravity. The armies grow again, hastily rebuilt on the faith of old glories and new hopes. Flags unfurl, maneuvers are planned, and alliances, shifting, fragile, vital, are woven across the continent. There is no true peace to be had. Beyond the borders, his return shudders through Europe like lightning. Austria and Prussia awake with alarm. Britain, steady and implacable, marshals its resources for a final blow. There are no illusions in the courts and palaces. Napoleon's escape was never meant to be a beginning, only an aftershock. To those powers, Elba represented not a simple exile, but a terminus, the full stop at the end of a turbulent era. Now the punctuation dissolves, and Europe prepares for war once more. Nights are spent with ink-stained fingers and splayed maps. The candlelight flickers over Napoleon's face, hollowing the eyes, carving new lines in the old. Wine cools in his glass, left half-finished as calculations fill the hours. In solitude, he murmurs, "This is the last chance to steer history, the final gamble. There is resolve, yes, but behind it, the weary knowledge of time closing in. The years away on Elba, the weight of decisions past, cannot be shaken off. Still, in the marrow of his bones, the sense of movement persists, a restlessness that cannot be stilled, even by defeat or exile. While the wind outside howls a little louder, and the corridors of his palace grow cold, Napoleon plans. He will not be passive. He will meet fate on his own terms. For him, the contours of Europe are forever negotiable, so long as he breathes. The march continues. North, always north, toward the gathering armies, the converging roads, the small Belgian towns that have never known such tension. And somewhere, out in the fields yet untouched by thunder and gunpowder, a name waits to be written. Waterloo, because truthfully for men like Napoleon, the ending must be forged in the clash of hooves and swords, in the roar and smoke that mark grand conclusions. Not quietly, not in retreat, but in open defiance of fate, even as hope and danger mingle indistinguishably in the night air. He rides forward. The wind, once companion and herald, now carries the scent of something vast and unknown. Memory, hope, ruin, renewal. They swirl together as the last act begins, and the world holds its breath for how it all must end. The wind cuts across the coast of southern France, charged with a current that crackles against the skin and pricks at the senses. There is something peculiar about it, a tension that tastes like hope and history all at once, as if the breeze itself remembers. The world seems to hold its breath, as though it knows that history has turned back to a page no one expected to read again. As you walk the shoreline, the only sounds are the steady crush of boots in wet sand and the distant rush of restless water. Each footstep echoes old glories and defeats, as if the land is whispering secrets inaudible to all but those who carry memory itself as a companion. Behind you, scattered among the rocks and sparse tufts of grass, a handful of men lift their heads to the horizon, their faces marked with fatigue and resolve. Ahead, the solitary figure leads, not with the triumphant swagger of parades past, nor the rigid formality of courtly receptions, but with something quieter and far more dangerous. Certainty. There are no drums, no golden eagles waving yet above the crowd. Only the pale sun catching on epaulettes, the curve of a bicorn hat, and the unshakable weight of destiny. This is how Napoleon Bonaparte comes home, not at the head of mighty columns, nor with the roar of artillery, but with silent footsteps, and a promise that hangs in the air as tangible as the salt sprayed by the March sea. He steps over memory itself, pressing into the world a question. Can the past be written anew, with fresh ink and unbroken lines? The first villages sleep when you pass, shutters tight and streets emptied by years of suspicion and rumor. But dawn comes fast in March, and as the sky bleeds silver, the rumors run faster than horses. The men in the fields pause, hands poised above plows, soiled fingers curling around hope or doubt. Women lean from balconies, squinting into sunlight, their children peeking from behind unfamiliar hems. The Emperor, back. It seems impossible, the sort of tale told in lamplight to ward off the cold. But then they see him, and the ordinary world breaks wide open. It is the face they remember, not untouched by exile, but hardened, furrowed, and bright with something that has nothing to do with the years lost. His gaze burns with the same restless fire that once consumed continents. It says, I have returned, and so has the dream. One by one, suspicion dissolves. Knees buckle, voices murmur. Is it truly him? Can it be? And then, conviction spreads like wildfire. Yes, he stands there, a living legend forged in the crucible of memory and longing. Soldiers are the first to follow. Their training drummed into them words like loyalty and command. But there is a deeper music they answer to now. Discipline bends to devotion, and their numbers swell with every mile. What starts as a handful soon becomes a march, then a tide. By the time you reach Grenoble, the shape of history has changed again. The king's men, drawn up in their rows, hesitate as the drama unfolds before them. Bayonets gleam, tension thickens, and into this silence steps Napoleon alone. No weapon, no armor, only the voice that once made the world tremble. If any of you will shoot your emperor, here I am. There is a breathtaking simplicity in his challenge, an audacity so absolute that it shatters all orders, all fear. The men lower their muskets, thunder erupting not from gunpowder, but from throats, cheers rising, uniforms cast aside. The line between friend and foe dissolved in a single heartbeat. The road, once closed, now opens like destiny itself, is clearing the way onward to Lyon, the streets swelling with those who remember what it was to be more than a kingdom at the edge of Europe, who recall the pulse of ambition, the taste of victory. Then to Paris, holy and hesitant. The king slips away, leaving behind only the faint echo of fleeing footsteps as France's heart gives a sudden thud of recognition. No revolution, no carnage, only a nation remembering itself, intoxicated by the return not just of a man, but of certainty incarnate, for a precious, frenetic stretch known as the 100 Days. The impossible blooms. Napoleon moves as if his blood is gunpowder, and his mind a blazing forge. Orders fly. Loyalists return to his side like migrating birds, compelled by the promise that once conquered worlds. Armies reassemble, with tattered flags stitched anew, drums pulsing in time to the heartbeat of hope. Diplomats scurry, old enemies draw together, as if they too sense that a chapter unfinished now writes itself again, more swiftly, more desperately, but in candlelit rooms, far from the rallying crowds and the thunder of boots. The truth murmurs in the shadows. Austria, Prussia, and Britain, those old adversaries, are gathering, their alliances tighter and their resolve sharper than before. Maps spread across the desk, rivers snaking in ink, towns like tiny citadels in the mind's battlefield. Napoleon's hand traces routes, plans campaigns, recalibrates a future, even as the weight of inevitability presses harder each night. He is tireless in movement, yet weariness encircles him, a companion as familiar as victory, as uninvited as exile. In the hours before dawn, as the fire burns low and the wine turns acrid, you hear the edge in his voice, a whisper, not of resignation, but of gravity. They will not cage me again. It is a promise as much to the world as to himself. Yet in this vow lies the kernel of truth. The empire has never been just a matter of borders or crowns, but an affair between one soul and a restless, waiting nation. He rides again, the roads leading northward toward fate. The fields of Belgium are unmarked by monuments, anonymous to all but the future. But something stirs in the earth itself, sensing that thunder is coming. The last march, the final confrontation, not just for a throne, but for the right to decide what France, and perhaps the world, will become. For men like Napoleon, endings are not quiet things. They refuse to slip silently into history's shadows. They demand to be written in thunder, so that even when silence returns, the echoes remain. Echoes carried on the wind, electric and eternal, long after boots have vanished from the sand. Summer in Belgium brings no comfort. The air is humid and thick with anticipation, laced with the tang of gunpowder before dawn. The rain has done its work, transforming meadows into mire, turning every tread of a man or beast into a struggle. Somewhere in the quiet before the first cannon sounds, tension threads the fields, settling heavy on every chest, friend and foe alike. Rising above the trembling plain, the false dawn glimmers over wet grass, gilding thousands of men standing shoulder to shoulder, their breath clouding in the chill light. From his vantage, Napoleon peers through the drizzle, the weight of empire pressing on damp shoulders. His eyes roam over columns of infantry, restless cavalry, the silent promise of cannon, yet hidden by the steam of morning. Above all, he feels the wrongness, not just in the mud thickening with every hour, but in the hush that denies the coming storm its energy, as if history itself hesitates at this brink. He measures his adversary, Wellington, implacable behind a sturdy ridge, the Anglo-Allied lines firm and disciplined, waiting as if they, too, know the value of patience on a day when time itself is sticky as clay. Farther off, shadows rumble. Prussians on the march, the last chapter of the old order pressing in with each muddy stride. Napoleon calculates and recalculates, knowing he has always trusted momentum, audacity. These are his weapons now dulled by rain and fate. The order to advance is a murmur in the morning, rippling out until it bellows along the ranks. Artillery to the fore, infantry ready, drums and fifes rolling, a desperate bravado over uneasy ground. The guns begin, a low, waking roar, sending shockwaves through the mud and men alike. Horses rear, unable to find footing, as the French assault lumbers forward, slow and thunderous, more struggle than sweep. Waterloo is not fought in grand, clean sweeps. It is a battle of attrition, of boots sucked down in mud, of musket misfires, of bayonet thrust in blinding fog. It is a math problem with variables that bleed and scream. Napoleon rides the lines, searching for the angle unseen, the weakness that might split those British squares apart. But Wellington is disciplined, his men seasoned, their colors locked tight in the grip of necessity. Smoke mingles with the drizzle. It is impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. Somewhere in that gauzy hell, men vanish into legend and into forgetting, lost in the chaos of wishes and commands. The drums of the Imperial Guard echo, reassuring and impossible, a heartbeat of invincibility. Yet they too wait, reserves for the moment when victory is just out of reach. the hand ready to grasp destiny once more. But the ground forgives no one today. The wheels of French cannon stick fast. Horses labor as men fall beside them. Each hour, the field consumes itself, trampled by the hope and horror of men who have seen too many such days already. Orders go out again and again. Attack, reinforce, hold. Each time a little longer, a little slower, as if the world resists the very idea of movement. As the afternoon deepens, new sounds rise, unfamiliar at first, but swelling into certainty. Prussian columns, arriving where the French line is thin, where hope is already threadbare. The din redoubles, gunfire stitched across the horizon. Napoleon sees everything unravel, first in glimpses, then in certainty. The reserves he holds back, the old guard in blue facings, regarded by all as the anvil upon which France is forged, must go in now, not in triumph but in necessity. They move steady and tall, banners glimmering as if denial could turn the tide. The field trembles beneath their advance. For a moment, all who watch believe the world might bend one last time. But it is not to be. They fade into the smoke, then shatter as the Prussian wave rolls upon them from the flank. The last glow of legend stamped down by the mud and the relentlessness of numbers. Twilight arrives with a stunned silence where once was cacophony. In a makeshift command post, officers whisper in circles, their maps useless. There is nowhere left to send orders. A heavy stillness settles over Napoleon as he sits alone, neither sobbing nor raging, only bearing the ineffable weight of loss. Hands that once shaped nations are now stained black with the powder of a last, exhausted bid for glory. Eventually he speaks, and the voice, once enough to command legions and thrall cities, is small, shaped by acceptance more than regret. The army performed miracles, but I was no longer lucky. The words are for his own ear, perhaps, more than for anyone else's. Night returns, hiding the bruised sky and the broken pride of men. Napoleon moves through the dark, not with the bravado of an exile seeking return, but with the quiet resignation of a man who finally comprehends the line between myth and memory. France lies behind him. Ahead lies only the flavors of defeat, bitter, lingering, unchanging. He rides toward the border as rain begins anew. A drizzle first, then a steady sheet that erases footsteps, blurs banners, makes memory into rumor. The soldiers no longer cheer. The marshaled dignity of empire recedes with each hoofbeat. There is no plan, no hidden escape, no promise of return, only the certainty of exile, real, permanent, not the stuff of rallying hopes, but the quiet conclusion to an era defined by noise. In the soft, unending rain, Napoleon is no longer general, nor emperor, nor legend. He is, for the first time, a man at history's periphery, no longer its center. The silence grows, immense and gentle, and though the world will argue for centuries about blame, about destiny, about whether it was weather or Wellington or fate, the truth at Waterloo is simpler. Even giants sink in mud. Even the most dazzling star burns out beneath gray, ordinary skies. The field is empty by nightfall, save for what the storm and the past choose to remember. Napoleon, riding into obscurity beneath the same sky that greeted his dawn, finds, at last, the impossible thing all conquerors fear most, not defeat, but memory growing still. The world that could not look away has finally, gently, closed its eyes. The waves strike relentlessly against volcanic rock, beating their centuries-old rhythm into the battered cliffs. Here, the water holds the taste of exile, a salt too sharp to ignore, bracing enough to remind you with every breath that there is no escape. Here, nothing is gentle. Here, the ocean is a jailer, not a road. This is St. Helena, a lonely speck in an immense, indifferent sea, where nature has little sympathy and even less mercy. For the first time, Napoleon Bonaparte faces something he cannot outmaneuver. There is no campaign to plan, no continent to subdue, no parade ground, no fluttering tricolor banners, no regiments gathered to cheer their emperor. The only audience now is the ocean, endlessly shifting and impossibly vast. The world Napoleon once spun on his ambitions has spun on without him, and time here is not measured in acts of glory but in tides and the slow corrosion of hope. Longwood House is a place of quiet decay, the loser's palace, battered by constant wind and shrouded in gray mist. The furniture is warped, the wallpaper peels, and the smell of mold seeps into everything. Every corner whispers of rain. Once parched for sleep during the feverish days of empire, he now finds hours between dreams, heavy and long. He paces the halls, boots no longer resounding with authority, but with the slow shuffle of a man exiled not only from his country, but from action itself. He walks the garden each morning, hand clasped behind his back, head bowed, not in defeat, but under the imponderable weight of memory. The marigolds struggle in the salty air. Wild grass overgrows the weak fence, and the wind blows always, relentless and untamable as history itself. Sometimes he stops to watch a bird dart by, pale against the gloom, gone too quickly for any company. He watches clouds shape and reshape themselves in an endless mimicry of the world he left behind, drifting without purpose, just as he does. Once, he ruled millions. Now his subjects are the slow-growing moss and the ever-present damp, the soundtrack made not of military bands or adoring crowds, but of distant waves and the gnawing hush of isolation. His circle is pitifully small, a handful of British officers, stern and curious, assigned to guard him against both rescue and escape. They are polite at best, wary at worst. He entertains them with chess matches and snatches of old stories, but the men always depart too quickly, as if afraid of catching the fever of his downfall. He writes, compulsively, letters that may never be sent, instructions to aides no longer at his side, notes in the margins of borrowed books, where he revisits Austerlitz, Marengo, Jena, triumphs he cannot help rehearsing, their order of battle detailed with fading ink. Sometimes he drafts imaginary plans, as if the world might still require his service, as if some continent waits for word from St. Helena to turn history once more. His nights grow longer. He lingers in the little parlor, a solitary figure staring into the remains of a fire. He thinks of Josephine, now gone from the world completely, absent even from letters. He thinks of his son, a child raised in distant courts, given a new name to match a new life, kept safe and, more importantly, kept far from his father's shadow. Priorities have shrunk. Evenings are often spent gazing at a battered globe, his weathered finger tracing the immense, merciless expanse between St. Helena and the world that once belonged to him. He follows the arc of the Atlantic to the coasts he can never touch again. France, Italy, the familiar warmth of Corsica, the glittering haze of Mediterranean light, so different from the cold gray monotony of exile. He is ill, though he tries not to show it. The doctors argue quietly outside his door about stomach ulcers, or something more dire. Some say poison, others simply disease. In truth, his body is shutting down one quiet failure at a time. But he does not let on. He coughs sometimes, dry and persistent. He sleeps longer each day, his wit dimming, his voice growing softer. He is not bitter. If anything, he is in awe, astonished by the silence, by the dull ache of absence, by the enormity of loss that only now, at the edge of the world, truly becomes real. They called me a monster, he once remarks to the empty room, and then they missed me when I left. In his words, there is no pride left, only wonder at the fickle, shifting allegiances of memory. Days and nights blur into one another, salt and rain, and the faint, drumming pulse of surf on dark stone. He spends more time alone now, silent in the tangled garden, eyes closed to the present and open only to the vanished past. He does not dream of war anymore, not of the thunder of cannons or the cry of cavalry. Instead, memory slips further back, past generals and treaties, to a time before empire. He dreams in those rare and gentle moments of Corsica, a boy's home, a stretching sky alive with stars, the clamor of childhood and the promise of whatever comes next. He remembers the scent of warm earth, of trees old as cities, of the mountain wind sharp with possibility. His hands, once stained with ink and gunpowder, now smell of salt and damp, but for an instant they are the hands of an unremarkable boy, half forgotten beneath the shadow of what he became. He sits by the sea, spine curved, breath slow. The ocean roars, sometimes in rage, sometimes in recall, and the world, at last, grows soft around him. A final exhalation, not defeat, but peace. For the first time in a lifetime roaring with movement, with ambition, with collision. Napoleon knows quiet, the honest quiet that comes when every battle is truly over. The sea does not forgive, but it remembers, and that is enough. History has moments where the world seems to hold its breath, as if aware that something irrevocable has changed. The death of Napoleon Bonaparte is one of those moments. A single life, powerful enough to shape continents and convulse nations, narrows at last to a still bed in the farthest corner of the world. On St. Helena, under the pale dawn, there is no fanfare, no parade, no slogans in the streets. There is only the quiet, the kind of quiet left by storms after they pass, when branches are broken and roofs battered, but the air is clean and undeniably altered. In that low-windowed room at Longwood House, you are struck by the weight of time. Here lies not just a solitary man. Here lies the residue of millions of hopes and fears, Frenchmen who cheered his coronation, soldiers who followed his eagles into fire, old enemies who learned to respect and even to fear him, revolutionaries and kings alike. The doctor watches, hands clasped behind his back, face drawn with the knowledge that he is marking the last breaths of an era. Attendants whisper and cross themselves under their breath. Is it a prayer for forgiveness or for gratitude? Does anyone living know which is deserved? The hush lingers. Each breath he draws is measured, uncertain, as if the man himself were unwilling to step out of the world he had so fiercely tried to bend to his will. With each exhale, the circle of the Emperor's influence contracts, first to this bed, then to his body, then, for a moment after that long final sigh, perhaps to nowhere at all. It's easy to believe, in this silence, that glory dies with the flesh. Yet the room does not grieve as much as it waits, uneasy, for the next chapter to begin. For someone like Napoleon, alive for so many in memory and myth, the line between being and not being is blurred outside. The island's hills are damp and overgrown. Men in red and blue uniforms pace the muddy paths, glancing up at cloud-streaked skies, wondering if, in Paris or London, bells are ringing, or glasses raised, or curses muttered. But in that moment, the world is as mute as the room. Someone closes the shutters. Another blows out a candle. For a long time, the only sound is the rainwater dripping from the eaves. Yet time never lingers for long. The news cannot be contained, not even by the vast Atlantic or imperial bureaucracy. Couriers mount horses, ships unfurl cold, heavy sails. Rumors spread faster than facts. In drawing rooms and taverns, however far from Longwood, people pause and repeat the news as if testing the world's reaction. Napoleon is dead. For many, he has been dead for years. Dead as a king unseated, a usurper exiled, a threat neutralized. For others, his death is an opening, a void where power once lived. For a few, it is a wound. The myth takes hold perhaps more quickly than the body cools. The generation that danced at his court will teach coming ones his exploits. Chroniclers write his name beside Caesar and Alexander. Schoolboys recite the names Austerlitz and Borodino as if reciting scripture. Artists remake him, sometimes as a demon, sometimes as a saint, often as both. Statues rise and are toppled. Paintings glorify and condemn. Poems and anthems echo in fields he never saw, in tongues he never spoke. Some say he was nothing but a tyrant, whose ambition drowned Europe in blood. Others say he was a liberator, the child of the revolution, who toppled kings, brought laws and rights, and shattered the old order. Still others see in him the lesson that greatness is always shadowed by hubris, and that the most remarkable lives are often the most solitary. The argument, once about policy and conquest, slowly becomes about memory and meaning. Yet in every telling, whether in classrooms, in novels, around dinner tables, that last day of Napoleon's life lingers in the background. Not the thunder of cannons or the cheers of the crowd, but the rain-soaked quiet, the shadowed room, the absence that follows. He belongs now to history, but unlike so many consigned to oblivion, he refuses to sleep. He is restless, revived again and again. For as long as there are questions about ambition and power, exile and legacy, when his coffin is finally borne home to Paris in 1840, thousands line the streets. They whisper, or cheer, or weep, or simply watch, because the man whose life ranked among the most dramatic in living memory is re-entering the world he once tried to command. Beneath Les Invalides' soft golden dome, his tomb becomes a pilgrimage site. Marble walls, grand staircases, light illuminating inscription after inscription. Students descend the steps and look down at the sarcophagus, wonder in their eyes. How did so much begin and end in one mind, one heart, one frail body now, at rest beneath red marble? What did he see in his final moments? Was it regret, or satisfaction, or simply the relief of no longer carrying the impossible weight of an empire? Some say he dreamed of home, of Corsican olive groves, of the turquoise sea, of a family long lost to age and conflict. Others believe his last visions were battlefields, flags snapping in wind, sunlight on steel. Perhaps, like all men, he saw only memory and realized, finally, that the measure of a life is what lingers after. 2 centuries on, the world is changed, but not unrecognizably. Borders shift, powers rise and fall, but the study of greatness and its perils continues. Napoleon's shadow flickers in politics and art, in the way leaders imagine themselves, in the way crowds yearn for both order and transformation. His faults and his genius are never entirely separated. He is both cautionary tale and immortal example, a king unthroned, a prisoner unbroken. To hear his name is to hear an echo, not of the man, not of the emperor, but of a kind of possibility, grand, dangerous, thrilling, and always incomplete. The silence of that morning on St. Helena is gone, but something else endures. The certainty that those who shape history are never entirely gone. They linger as questions, as warnings, as inspiration, names whispered beneath domes, recited in classrooms, debated in parliaments and cafes. Napoleon left the world as a man, but became something more, a story that refuses to be finished. And for as long as humanity aches for greatness, we will feel that story every time his name is spoken, as vivid and immediate as the hush that follows thunder. Paris, in the earliest hour, belongs to the quietly persistent, the baker, the street sweeper, the insomniac looking for revelation. Pale gold sunlight slips over cobblestones, still sticky with the previous night's rain, pooling against dark iron grates and illuminating the 100 faces of statues who watch the city change with every dawn. Along the Seine, shuttered bookstores wait patiently to open. Above, the sky is a slow blue, threaded at the edges with soft amber. Somewhere behind the tapestry of waking city life stands Les Invalides, its dome of flame in the gentle morning. Step closer and you'll feel something shift, as if time is conscious here, pushing and halting in deference to what lies beneath that great golden arch. Inside, the hush is absolute, woven from footsteps and the reverent hush of voices exploring marble corridors, lined with glory and ghosts, beyond chapels and galleries under the vast, careful dome. The final room waits, a rotunda encircling absence and presence all at once. Peering over the balustrade, you look down into the hollow at the heart of the world's memory, where Napoleon Bonaparte lies utterly still. He does not lie in shadow, nor in the exile of a far wind-whipped island. Not anymore. The world that once watched him blaze across maps and reorder destinies has laid him to rest amid stone polished by centuries of tribute. His tomb is a deep-nested puzzle, each layer stacked in deliberate grandeur. Red quartzite resisting time, green granite whispering of victories, black velvet shrouding defeated dreams, steel and at last silence. 6 layers in all, wrapped as much in myth as in earth. As you walk the perimeter, your shoes rattling quietly on tile laid by those who came before. You realize this is not merely a resting place. It is a monument to momentum, a stillness left behind by a life that crackled with restless energy from beginning to end. There is neither triumph nor despair here now, only the resonance of someone who moved the world, and in moving, left deep, indelible grooves in its surface. Napoleon is remembered not for mercy, nor for stillness, nor peace. He is not a symbol of surrender, nor of patience, nor of the slow, steady tide of ordinary existence. His legacy is one of force of will, force of action, force of vision, writ large, against the limitations of body, nation, and fate. He turned maps to game boards. He made fortune a matter of decision, not of chance, but he changed the world, not simply because he won. Countless men before and after him laid claim to that brittle prize, only to be devoured by time. No, he remains present in our memory because he stood, time and again, against the hush of inevitability. He showed in blinding clarity what happens when a single will refuses to be silenced, even in the shadow of every force that would quiet it. His victories faded, his empires crumbled, but the echo of striving endures, a siren call to all who dream fiercely and refuse resignation. As you trace his footsteps in your mind, scenes flicker behind your eyes. A boy on Corsica, desperately drawing the continents of possibility. A teenager, slight and solitary, overlooked in the frigid corners of a military academy. A young general, scrawling strategies in sleepless fever, his ambition already too large for comfort. An emperor, briefly, reluctantly mortal, cloaked in brilliance and solitude. The exile, not once but twice, unbowed even as the world that once trembled at his name withdrew its awe. By the end, the world's gaze had become distant, then absent, but he still imagined, still schemed, still tried. He was not, as the stories sometimes tell us, a hero. He was not shaped solely for legend or for warning. He was simply and profoundly a man convinced beyond argument that he could hold the threads of history between his hands, and for a moment, no matter how brief, he demanded the world answer to him. Inevitably it broke him, but history has always had more sympathy for those who try and fail greatly than for those who never try at all. You step back, feeling the ancient air curl around your shoulders, soft as morning, gentle as forgiveness. The footsteps of other visitors cross yours, echoing agelessly. Some linger with questions. Others leave with a kind of hush folded inside them. The doors of Les Invalides will open tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, admitting more seekers, more witnesses, more would-be emperors and quiet dreamers. Outside now, the city stirs. Traffic rumbles, a bird calls in the increasing light. A faint wind runs down the avenues as if waking the world to new opportunities. Yet even as you emerge into sunlit Paris, you carry that moment of stillness, that memory of a life that demanded noise, and yet now rests utterly quiet. Soon, like the field at Austerlitz, or the narrow passageways of St. Helena, all human striving grows quiet beneath the steady advance of time. The thunder of names softens. The cannons of ambition fall silent, letting the grass grow tall over all the old wounds, and the maps of power curl and fade with the passing years. You do not need to have commanded armies, or worn a crown to understand this man. You only need to have wanted something so much that it startled the world, or to have experienced the sting of solitude in the pursuit of greatness. Our ambitions take many forms, but the desire to shape the world, even in the smallest way, unites us across centuries and continents. Now, as the day wanes, let yourself rest from this journey. Let the banners and standards lower. Let the ships of expectation find harbor. Close your eyes. Breathe in and out, as gentle and rhythmic as the waves that once washed the lonely shores of exile. Sleep need not carry the burden of conquest. Let dreams come not as armies to be marshaled, but as friendly footsteps, bringing only what you need. Tonight you are not at war. You are not pursued by history. There is no empire to build, no destiny to wrestle into shape. You are simply at rest, in the quiet Napoleon so rarely found for himself. Sleep gently, knowing that a crown is not needed to be remembered. Only stillness, only peace, only the deep and honest rest of a soul setting itself down, for now, beneath the quiet dome of morning,